And we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this World Astrology Report live stream. So in this stream, we're going to be talking about some of the incredible astrology of July. There is a really remarkable outer planet configuration coming into play right now, and it will be peaking in July for now. And this is a really, really rare piece of astrology. It's got a lot of astrologers very excited. So we're going to be talking about that. And in particular, we're going to be talking about some of the things that the legendary French astrologer, André Barbault, had to say about this astrology, because Barbault said some very positive things about this particular configuration. And we're going to be thinking about what Barbault said, whether it looks like he was on the money or not. Obviously, we're not in July yet, but we're going to be trying to evaluate, does it look like Barbault was on track with his predictions about this astrology or not? And we're going to be digging into that, and then I'm going to give you my own thoughts on what I think this astrology signifies and what could be coming in July. So this is the configuration that everybody is getting very excited about. It's being referred to by many people as the Barbault basket. You can see that it has this kind of basket-like shape in terms of the aspects that the planets are making with each other. Now, what's going on here is that we have all of 4 out of the 5 outermost planets, and we include Pluto in that, at 4 degrees of their sign. So you can see we have Pluto at 4 degrees of Aquarius, Neptune at 4 degrees of Aries, Uranus at 4 degrees of Gemini, and Jupiter at 4 degrees of Leo. Then we also have Saturn in a somewhat wide conjunction to Neptune right now. But what this also means is that a lot of these planets are making powerful aspects with each other. So you can see that Pluto and Jupiter are in an opposition there. Pluto and Neptune are in a sextile. You can see this blue line here is a sextile aspect, 60 degrees. Neptune and Uranus are also in a sextile, again, another 60-degree aspect. But then Uranus and Pluto are in a trine aspect with each other. And of course, Jupiter is also making a sextile with Uranus, trine with Neptune. So all of these planets, which represent certain impulses, certain energies, are tightly configured to each other and are working together in some way. Before we really get into this, just a little bit about André Barbault, who passed away in 2019. He's a legendary French astrologer, made a lot of very important contributions to astrology, particularly mundane astrology, which is what he specialized in, i.e. the astrology of the world. And he popularized and invented a lot of very influential techniques. He made some quite high profile predictions that turned out to be correct. Among other things, the pandemic of 2020. This quote was bandied around quite often during the early days of the pandemic from Barbault. This is something that he wrote in 2011. He said, "It may well be that we are seriously threatened by a new pandemic in 2020, 2021. And those 2 years are really the high point of that pandemic period. So that's one high profile prediction that he got very right. Now, this astrology that we're talking about in July, this so-called Barbault basket, you can see how there is this kind of basket-like shape with the aspects here. Now, we need to correct maybe something of a misunderstanding about this astrology, because actually André Barbault never talked about a basket. André Barbault wrote about the astrology of 2026, and in particular, the harmonious configuration of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto that's part of this basket configuration. And he wrote very positively of this. This is what we call a minor grand trine. But then the addition of Jupiter here in opposition with Pluto turns it into this basket-like shape. It creates the rim of the basket, so to speak. Now, as far as I'm aware, I believe it was actually my colleague and frequent collaborator, S.J. Anderson, who started calling this the basket. And he did this on Twitter, and this term, the basket, caught on, and also in association with Barbault. So I think there's something of a misunderstanding that Barbault himself talked about this basket configuration. He didn't really get into the opposition between Jupiter and Pluto, as far as I'm aware. He was more focused on this minor grand trine and the astrology in general. But just for correctness' sake, I just wanted to clear that up about where this term has come from. As far as I'm aware, and I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that S.J. Anderson is the popularizer of the basket term. So this, if we strip away Jupiter, what we're looking at here is again, a minor grand trine, the technical term for this aspect pattern between Uranus, 4 degrees of Gemini, Neptune, 4 degrees of Aries, and Pluto at 4 degrees of Aquarius, making Uranus and Pluto in a trine, which is generally seen as a powerful flowing aspect. It's a powerful aspect where the two planets are in agreement with each other. Then we also have Pluto and Neptune in a sextile aspect, which is also a flowing aspect of agreement. The energies are supposed to be harmonized with each other, but it's less powerful than a trine. And then same with Neptune and Uranus, also in a sextile. So this is another flowing aspect, less powerful than a trine, but nevertheless, it indicates that the planets are in agreement with each other. So, what did Barbault actually say about this astrology? So, I have a quote that I've taken here from his book Planetary Cycles, Mundane Astrology, which I have here. Very much a recommended book if you're interested in the astrology of the world, mundane astrology. It's pretty much essential, I would say. And this is what he said about this astrology of 2026. Quote, "It is the most benefic configuration of the century, and its interplanetary partnership will work for the best in a splendid relaunch of civilization. It contains a harmonious relationship between primordial opposites, the coming together of the external and the internal, rational and spiritual, mind and soul, human beings surpassing themselves while experiencing life on a higher level." So, extremely positive, and you have to wonder, has Andre hit the mark there? We're still a month away from the peak of this energy, and it will be in play actually for the next couple of years anyway. So it's actually, rather than being something new, it's something that we're already experiencing and have been for some time. And I don't know about you, but I am not sure that those kinds of very positive phrases quite describe the mood of the times. Here's another quote from Barbault. This is from an article that he wrote, again addressing this 2026 astrology. He said, "The New World civilization, the beginnings of which appeared around the year 2000, is in full flight here. This entry into the second quarter of the century bears the stamp of the achievement of a new age of humanity. The central and harmonic position of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is especially expressive of a promotion of the lower strata of the world population, a significant rise in the standard of living of the poor, a victory over misery won in unprecedented solidarity." I find this quote much more accurate, I would say, in terms of where we're at, and perhaps again not completely accurate. But I think this quote here and what he says here is much more arguably justifiable, and we'll get into why in a moment. I want to just emphasize that we should be fair to André Barbault here. A lot of astrologers have zoned in, honed in on these particular quotes of his about 2026, and they've been shared a lot. And there's quite a number of astrologers that are involved in mundane astrology have talked quite extensively about this astrology and referenced these quotes, and I'm one of those people, so I have played a part in that. And I think there's a little bit of a risk that we boil Barbault's work down a little bit too much to just these things that he said about 2026. We've pulled out these quotes, and he's written, he would have written an enormous amount in his career. And I think that it would not be fair to just judge him on these particular predictions that he made. I think that he has, again, made countless predictions over the course of his career. It's just that we're now heading into this particular window that he wrote about, that we are pulling out and highlighting these particular quotes. But I don't think any astrologer should or could be just judged on one particular prediction. And he got quite a lot of stuff right. And the other thing to bear in mind is that he's no longer with us, unfortunately. He passed away in 2019. And he may well, if he was still with us, he probably would have updated his visions of what's going on. It's quite easy for us sitting here in 2026 to look back on something that he wrote many years ago and say, well, that's not quite right, is it? That's very easy to do. But we've had the benefit of being able to update our thinking as we've watched what's unfolded in the world. He hasn't had that. So we should bear that in mind. And again, don't place our entire judgment of the man and his work on these quotes. Nevertheless, since they are very well known, I think it's interesting to look at them and consider whether or not they have played out. Now, I have highlighted here a article from Gallup International, the polling organization. And I know there are issues with opinion polls and so forth, but nevertheless, I still think it's interesting to look at what a polling organization thinks or has gathered about the state of the world based on its international polling work. Now, this is its headline here, which is "A Divided World Looks to 2026, Optimism in the Global South, Anxiety in the West, and Among Older Generations. The latest findings from the world's longest running global public opinion study." This is from the end of December 2025, so not so long ago. And essentially, the poll is saying there's a very mixed picture. It really depends on where you are in the world as to what you think about the state of the world right now. This is a quote from the article from Gallup. "As the findings show, the world entering 2026 is deeply divided. Emerging and developing regions in the global south remain relatively optimistic, while advanced Western economies and older generations across regions express growing anxiety, particularly about economic prospects and global peace." So not everybody sees what's going on in the world in the same way right now, and there's a lot more pessimism and gloom about the state of things in the West. Now, I would ask, could that be because, relatively speaking, the status of the West is falling, or the relative affluence of the West is falling, and the relative affluence of the global South, quote unquote, is growing? I think it's quite natural among human beings where if they feel like things aren't as good as they used to be for them, they're going to assume that means the whole world's going to hell in a handbasket, as they say. But my sense is that there's a lot of optimism in many parts of the world. I personally live in Southeast Asia, and I don't really get the sense that there's this same kind of level of gloom here at all. I think people are, from what I can tell, relatively optimistic about the future in general. Of course, there are serious problems, as there are everywhere. But if we think back to Barbault's prediction, he was talking about the rising up of the poor of the world. And I don't think he's necessarily wrong to say that that's kind of what's happened and where we're at. And so if we're thinking, if we're sitting from a corner of, say, the developed world and saying, well, he got that wrong, the world feels terrible, I think it's worth stepping back a bit and thinking, well, is that actually true, or is it just that there's some kind of rebalancing going on, which has perhaps made life more difficult for you or for certain corners of the world, but in others things are getting better? So I'm trying to steelman Barbault's case here. I'm trying to see ways in which we could see that he is indeed correct, and I think this is an important perspective to bear in mind. Now, you can see here, this is a image showing what's called the Barbault cyclic index, which is a technique that Barbault popularized, which essentially adds up the angular separation of the outer planets and produces this chart, which is said to be able to show regions of more chaos, more difficulty, time. And I'm talking about regions of time, and more harmonious, easier times, and so forth. Now, the reason that I'm showing this is that this is actually a tool that I made myself using Claude AI. And I, these days, can't program code at all. I have no idea. I would have no idea where to begin to make a tool like this. But I just did it very easily with AI. I made my own tool that does all this stuff. And I've made several astrology tools using Claude that I'm using because they do things that I haven't been able to find software that can do. And so I think that's kind of incredible in some respects. And don't get me wrong, there are plenty of very problematic things about AI, which we will talk about in this presentation. But if you were to step back a bit and think, well, we've got these tools now that can produce works of quite sophisticated analysis and can correct our grammar and can produce calculating tools like this in minutes. I mean, that's quite impressive in certain respects. It's quite an achievement technically that we've managed to build these tools. Now, again, there are very serious issues with them, which we will talk about. But just from a sheer perspective of kind of ingenuity, it's quite miraculous, really, that we've produced this stuff. So when you look at that astrology that we're talking about, that remarkable outer planet configuration, and you're tempted to think, well, nothing particularly amazing is happening, I think you'd be probably wrong to say that. Something quite remarkable is happening in the tools that we've been able to bring into the world at this time that are at least quite ingenious. And nobody, as far as we know, has ever had anything like this in history, at least not during this run around of the cycle. Just a quick request, if you are watching this or if you're watching the recording of it, if you could just give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. If you haven't, that really helps with the algorithm. Now, we're going to look a bit more critically at this astrology now and our reading of it. And we're going to ask the question, do sextiles and trines equal good automatically? This is, I think, an assumption that some people are making when they look at this astrological configuration. They're seeing these trines and sextiles, which are generally held by astrologers to be harmonious, supportive, positive aspects between planets. And I think there's a temptation to equate these positive flowing aspects with goodness and to say, well, because these are flowing aspects, that means that these times should be great. And I think we need to be a bit careful of doing that. This is Joseph Stalin shaking hands with Joachim von Ribbentrop in 1939. This was basically the Nazi Soviet pact that they agreed in 1939, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. And the reason I'm showing this is to put forward the message that when, say, malefic forces agree with each other, that's not necessarily good. When challenging forces agree with each other, that's not necessarily going to be a good thing for everybody, or at least it's not necessarily going to be experienced as a good thing. We have the Soviets and the Nazis basically making a non-aggression pact here in 1939. Yes, that's very nice. They're in a trine, but is it nice? Not so much, is it? For the rest of the world. So it's a little bit of a silly point, but I think you get what I'm trying to say here. Coming back to our minor grand trine, which we have pictured here again, we've got three planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, in harmonious aspect with each other. But I would argue that all three of these planets can feel rather malefic, meaning essentially meaning unpleasant in their expression. Uranus can cause sudden, shocking, disruptive change. Neptune can bring illusion and delusion. Pluto can force you to undertake a journey to the underworld and cause power struggles and things of that nature. So, these planets, I think, have positive expressions and effects as well. There's no doubt about that, but they are in general quite rough influences. There are, a number of astrologers consider these to be malefic planets. Malefic doesn't mean bad, it means experienced as unpleasant. And what these planets are is they are great change makers affecting the world at large. And humans don't tend to like change that much. They usually like to get into a state of comfort and stay there. Now, some more than others, of course. It depends on how you're constituted. But generally speaking, we don't really enjoy very rapid change that forces us to do things differently in a short period of time. These are powerful change-making planets that are collaborating with each other. So this is a time of extremely rapid change, and the fact that it doesn't feel great to many people, I think, is actually probably quite inevitable. Now, I want to point here to the Battle of Stalingrad. Here's a grim picture of that battle underway, one of the greatest but most destructive battles in the history of war, from July the 17th, 1942 to February the 2nd, 1943. And it's estimated that between 1 and 3 million people were killed during this battle, which was essentially a turning point in the Second World War when the Nazis were trying to invade Russia. Now, why am I talking about the Battle of Stalingrad here? Well, here are our three friendly outer planets in 1943, at the 1st of January 1943, so in the thick of the Battle of Stalingrad, which is a battle that killed, as I said, 1 to 3 million people. And what are these planets doing? Oh, look, they are in a very harmonious configuration here. They're in a minor grand trine, the same configuration that they are in right now. Now, granted, the planets, when they were in this configuration, there are differences with the configuration of today, and this was not as geometrically perfect. So in our current, the current state in 2026 in July, we're going to see these planets all at 4 degrees of their sign. So these sextiles and trines are going to be exact. That didn't happen in the same way in the 1940s when we had this astrology. But nevertheless, these planets were in flowing aspects with each other, and assuming that that equals good would probably not have been a sensible thing if you're trying to describe the times during the Second World War. Now, just to compare more directly these two configurations. On the left, we have the astrology in 1943. On the right, we have the same planets in July of 2026. Now, again, the configuration, relatively speaking, is the same, 2 sextiles and a trine. But firstly, all the planets are in different signs. That can have an impact on how this stuff is expressed, of course, because planets behave differently in different signs. Secondly, the other major factor to keep in mind is that in 1943, these planets were predominantly in their waning cycles, meaning that you can see that Uranus, which is the fastest moving of the 3 planets, is here in Gemini, and it's actually moving towards Pluto and towards Neptune. So it's in the waning phase of its cycles with these 2 planets. So these cycles are kind of coming to an end here. Not the Pluto-Neptune cycle. They're in their waxing phase, but with respect to Uranus's cycles with Pluto and Neptune are in their waning phases. So waning and waxing is a different feeling. Like waning is more about consolidation and pruning and preparing for the new, whereas waxing, things are emergent and coming out into the world. In our 2026 astrology, you can see that Uranus is now ahead of Pluto and Neptune. So these cycles are in their waxing phases. All three synodic cycles that you can generate from these three planets are in their waxing phases. So that's one reason why there is a difference between these configurations. Now, I want to give a shout out to an astrologer here. I don't know what his real name is. He doesn't use it publicly. He just goes by astrologer on X Twitter, and his handle is Jyotir Astrology. Very experienced and wise and smart astrologer who does a lot of work to recover the ancient traditions of astrology and to try to figure out more effective ways of doing it. Again, I want to give a hat tip to him because he turned me on to another way of understanding why the astrology of the moment is not quite as good as it might first look. And it has to do with signs of long ascension and short ascension. This is an image I've taken from Astrogrammer. Thank you to them. Um, Essentially, when you move away from the equator, because of the geometry of the solar system and of the planet and so forth, signs, the different signs spend different amounts of time rising. On the equator, every sign rises for about 2 hours, 12 signs, 24 hours, 2 hours per sign. But if you move away from the equator, whether that's north or south, you start to get differences between the time taken for the signs to rise. And in astrology, this is called signs of long ascension and short ascension. This image shows how some of the signs you can see, because they rise at different times of the year, take quite a long time to rise, and then other signs take a short time to rise. And what Jyotir astrology turned me onto is the idea that the ancients had, which is that affects how the planets, how the planets interact with each other. So the signs can be divided into long and short ascension. And this is different depending on the hemisphere. But in the northern hemisphere, the signs of short ascension are Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, and Gemini. And the signs of long ascension are Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius. So there's two groups, basically, signs of long ascension and signs of short ascension. Now, this is a quote from Claudius Ptolemy, extremely influential Hellenistic astrologer, from his Tetrabiblos. Ptolemy says, quote, "And sometimes also among the signs that ascend slowly, the sextile aspect destroys when it is afflicted. And again, among the signs that ascend rapidly, the trine." So what Ptolemy is saying there, and he's not the only traditional astrologer to say this, is that depending on the signs that planets are in, the aspects change their flavor, and that sometimes sextiles can be more like squares, and sometimes trines can be more like squares. So if we come back again to our configuration here, we can see that actually all of our planets in this minor grand trine, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they're all in signs of short ascension. So if we come back to what Ptolemy says that in signs of short ascension, the trine destroys. So we have Uranus and Pluto in a trine here. And what Ptolemy would say is that this is actually going to feel less trine-like and more square-like. It's actually a harsher aspect than you might think. So we have, essentially, if Ptolemy is correct, if this doctrine is correct, this aspect between Uranus and Pluto is actually quite rough. Now, This is an old doctrine that was lost in astrology, and most modern astrologers, I don't think, even know about it. Um, was it lost because it didn't work, or was it lost because it's a bit inconvenient and makes things more complicated than we'd like? It could be. If we think about what Uranus and Pluto are doing, they made their conjunctions in 1965 and 66 at the time of the civil rights movement. This is LBJ signing the Civil Rights Act, which came at that time. These Uranus-Pluto conjunctions tend to bring cultural revolutions and rapid cultural change. Now, from 2012 to 2015, Pluto and Uranus made a square aspect, which is a friction aspect, a difficult aspect. And they were making their exact squares between 2012 and 2015, but we can say that they were in orb of square, say through the 2010s, very roughly speaking. And during that time, we saw all of these kind of let's say protest movements, and some of them were more, at times more like riots and so forth. But we have these kind of these uh, risings up, let's say, on certain matters. We have Black Lives Matter here, we have Me Too here, and the themes are basically the same as some of the things that were coming up in the 60s. Right? We have black rights, minority rights, women's rights, sexual rights, and so on and so forth. Right? The same themes came up again in quite a rough, challenging, friction-producing way in the 2010s. So, I wonder if this doctrine from Ptolemy is right. Maybe we can expect that this Uranus-Pluto trine may actually generate more of this kind of thing. Let's watch and see what happens, and just watch. I think I don't want to make a pronouncement either way, but I think we should just watch what happens and see if there is that kind of friction relating to identity themes, and how those kind of go down over the next, particularly. Let's watch what happens in July, but more generally, this astrology is in play over the next couple of years. So let's see what happens. Now, another way to just think about this minor grand trine that Barbault was talking about is that it's 3 synodic cycles in one. We just talked about the Pluto-Uranus synodic cycle. Synod just means meeting, by the way. But there are 3 cycles here, right? There's the Pluto-Neptune cycle. Those 2 planets are in sextile now, but they have a cycle of their own. We have the Neptune-Uranus cycle. Again, they're in sextile aspect, and they have a cycle, the Uranus-Neptune synodic cycle. And then we have the Uranus-Pluto synodic cycle. So there are actually 3 cycles in one that are all reaching an important moment at the same time. So one way to break down what this configuration is all about is to think about what these individual cycles are about. And this is something that we could talk about for hours and hours and hours, because there is all sorts of stuff going on in each of these cycles. And I'm not going to do that in this session. I'm just going to be very brief and focus on things that I think are particularly important right now. Now, the last Uranus-Neptune conjunctions came in 1993 in Capricorn. So that was the start of the current Uranus-Neptune cycle, which lasts about 170 years. And most notably, we have the release of the World Wide Web. The public release in 93, it was developed a little bit before that, but the planets were in orb of their conjunction as Tim Berners-Lee, pictured here, was rolling out the World Wide Web. So we have, I think, an important theme of this Uranus-Neptune cycle is the rollout of the World Wide Web and its development over time, what it turns into. Pluto-Uranus conjunctions, again, we already looked at these. We saw the civil rights movement, and of course there was the hippie thing and Vietnam and all that stuff at the time of these conjunctions. The exact conjunctions were in 1965, 1966. At this time, ARPANET, which is basically the forerunner of the internet, was being launched. Now, this is a picture showing what ARPANET, the forerunner of the internet, looked like in 1972, but you can go back earlier than that. The project, I think it was started in 66, if I'm not mistaken. So again, we have this same theme. We have a major seed moment relating to the digital world. And we can go back to the Pluto-Neptune conjunctions of 1891 and 1892, making the last quarter of the 19th century, roughly speaking, the conjunctional period of the Pluto-Neptune cycle. And at this time, we had the British building what they called the All Red Line, which was a globe-spanning telegraph network using undersea cables and so forth. It covered the whole globe. And this is really just a kind of archetypal forerunner of the internet, in my opinion. It uses electricity to transmit messages around the world. It's a kind of, archetypally speaking, it's not so different really. It's a very early seed moment for the digital network that we have today. This is a kind of nervous system of the planet being seeded. And these conjunctions, this Pluto-Neptune cycle is, in my opinion, the master cycle. It's more powerful than the others. And so you can see how this development comes at these conjunctions, but then the conjunctions of with Uranus bring kind of new iterations, more high-tech, advanced iterations of this fundamental idea. So we have, again, to come back to our minor grand trine, all three of these synodic cycles, among many other things, have to do with this kind of global planetary nervous system, this digital nervous system that's coming into being right now. Now, this is showing the sextile between Pluto and Neptune. Pluto and Neptune do a weird thing in their cycle in which they stay in the same aspect for very long periods of time. And this is their waxing sextile, which is their first sextile following the conjunctions of 1891 and 1892. This is from Archetypal Explorer website. And this shows the century-long sextile that Pluto and Neptune have been in. They came into orb of this aspect in the 1940s, and they basically stayed in it with the exception of a kind of lull period in the 2000s. 9/11, maybe it kind of sort of killed the momentum of something that was growing. And where we are now is we are in this final phase of this long sextile. We get exact sextiles between 2026 and 2032. You might have heard that time period being bandied around quite a lot in spiritual circles. This is the final phase of something that has been in development since the 1940s. So have a think about what started to come into view in the 1940s and is reaching some sort of culmination right now. Now, again, 1940s, what was invented then? The computer was invented then. The transistor was invented then. And so putting all this together, my sense is that we are basically now seeing the rollout of a kind of totalitarian, essentially, digital systems. These are a bunch of stories. I did the search for digital totalitarianism, and these were the stories that came up. How Gaza became laboratory for digital totalitarianism, resistance and digital totalitarianism, the case of Myanmar, digital ID, programmable money, paved way for dystopian, hellhole, horrific totalitarian regimes. That's a bit of a more extreme one. ESN at European Parliament. Russia is rapidly moving towards digital totalitarianism. Canada may be on the path to digital totalitarianism. It's happening everywhere, right? They're rolling out these kind of digital systems, building data centers all over the world. And there's a bunch of connecting technologies which are being rolled out right now very visibly. We have digital ID, we have stable coins and CBDCs, we have AI. And when you put these technologies together, especially with the kind of the smartphones that we all carry everywhere, we have recipe for a totalizing surveillance and control system. There's nothing conspiratorial about saying this. This is just very obviously what's happening. It's very clearly happening. It's very brazenly happening. And if you wonder what all these data centers are for, these massive, massive, massive data centers that they're building, it's not so you can make pretty pictures with ChatGPT or Midjourney or whatever. You know, that's not what it's for. They don't need that kind of power to do something like that. It's to basically create this totalizing digital system. And now I'm sure that its proponents can come up with some arguments as to why that's good for us. Um, Maybe they might argue that it adds knowledge to the AI systems, which can then use that knowledge to help us or something like that. Don't particularly buy it myself. I personally think it's about control. And so I just want to highlight Catherine Austin Fitts and her work, because she's done probably more than anybody else, I think, to popularize the understanding of what this means. Resist the digital control grid. I believe she might have come up with the phrase digital control grid. She's an expert on finance and money, and she has a website, Solari Report, which I would encourage people to check out if you're interested in learning how you can maintain financial sovereignty in the midst of what's happening. But happening it is. And again, we're looking at this really extraordinary astrology, and what's being built is extraordinary, and not necessarily in a good way, but it is remarkable. It is ingenious. It is something that you would expect very remarkable astrology to signify. So when we're looking at this astrology and saying this is extremely rare astrology, wow, this configuration's so perfect, we, I think, might make a mistake if we just assume, oh, this is great for humanity. You know, maybe it has good aspects. I won't deny that there are some good aspects to the technology that we have. It does some useful stuff. Like, it would be foolish to deny that completely, but there are great problems with it as well. So we have to keep that in mind. Now, a viewer of my channel, who I won't name at their request, but they did send me some information about this aspect, which I find interesting and relevant. I want to share with you. So this is a quote taken from this book, Aspect Pattern Astrology, by Bruno and Louise Huber and Michael Huber. I think these were Swiss psychological astrologers who did a lot of study of aspect patterns. And this is a quote from their book on the aspect pattern that they call the cradle, which essentially is another word for the basket, right? They call it the cradle. But this is what they say about this aspect pattern. The cradle derives great stability from its symmetry. If something unpleasant approaches, this person can just switch over and is suddenly protected by an invisible wall from any criticism or attack. They would like to have the security and protection of a stable life situation and actively pursue this. In other words, they try to avoid falling out of the cradle. They cling to it and like to be clung to, but it is just those people with a cradle in their horoscope who have the development task of leaving the security of the cradle and going out into the world, which can be likened to going into the empty space of the horoscope in order to become independent. Now, this is supposed to be a description of the psychology of somebody who has this aspect pattern in their natal chart. This book isn't about mundane astrology. It's not about how this stuff plays out in world astrology. But nevertheless, I think we can still take something from this. Because if you think about what these totalitarian systems are, they are totalizing systems that are supposedly aimed at kind of keeping the system safe from those who would do it harm, and but also it will also justify itself as like, this is going to keep you safe as well. This is going to keep your children safe, which is one of the lines of argument that's being used right now to roll out digital ID. It's supposedly being rolled out to protect children because, you know, our elites really care about that. Which I'm not totally convinced about, given certain things we've found out about this year. But This is, this is for our own good. This is for our own protection. The thing that's being rolled out is going to keep us safe from crime, keep us safe from bad ideas and disinformation and all of this kind of thing, right? So we're trying to create something here that's going to supposedly protect us, but um, does it does it really help people to sort of wrap them up in cotton wool too much? I would ask that question. And again, if you think about this psychological description, um, even in this book, they argue that people who have this aspect pattern in their horoscope have the development task of leaving the security of the cradle and going out into the world. So I think that this astrology is kind of challenging us in some respects. We're going to be presented with a very powerful system that is going to have its benefits as well. It's not only stick, it's carrot as well. It will make things very convenient and easy, and the alternative will be less convenient and less easy and less quote unquote safe. But this is what we are being challenged with, in my opinion, as a species. I don't think they will have things all their own way, meaning those people who are rolling this system out. So I think it's fair enough to use the word they here. I was listening to the Higher Side Chats podcast the other day. Shout out to Greg from Higher Side Chats. And him and his guest Ian Davis were discussing the rollout of this system. And they were talking about how the rollout has encountered certain problems. One of the problems is essentially that the data centers that they are constructing require vast amounts of data. They chew up resources, water, etc., etc. And these are resources that aren't unlimited, at least some of them. Certainly, water in some cases is a scarce resource. Um, and yet, at the same time, some of the same elements have also driven the whole climate change narrative. We have to reduce our energy use, supposedly, but we also have to build these massive, vast, energy-consuming data centers. Those two things don't fit. So there's been some kind of, you probably have to say, strategic blunder has been made along the way here, and this might, I think, cause this plan some problems in its rollout. Now, let's just take a quick breath. We're going to go back to the 1890s again, because as we've seen, the Pluto-Neptune cycle that I talk about a lot on my channel started with conjunctions 1891, 1892, but that whole period, those planets were in orb. So this is the conjunctional period of our current cycle. Everything probably you'd ever want to know about our world, I say, I'm not really exaggerating much. You can go and look at the 1880s and 1890s. It's all there in embryonic form. It's all flowing around the zeitgeist. It's all there in less developed form. But the themes that we're dealing with today, they're all there. We saw it already with the global telegraph network. All right, now, somebody to pay very close attention to, whose work is very relevant and interesting to our world, H.G. Wells, one of the first science fiction writers, together with Jules Verne. H.G. Wells was putting out some of his most famous books in the 1890s in this seed period. Now, one of those was The War of the Worlds, a story about an alien invasion of Earth. And hasn't that story stayed with us since then? Yes, it has, you'd have to say. And it's something that we are still very much thinking about today, or at least some people. H.G. Wells is an interesting figure. He was very connected to the British establishment of the time. He was in the Fabian Society. And he had visions of like how the world should be run, which was basically a technocratic socialist vision where the world is controlled by those who supposedly know best. I don't know exactly what H.G. Wells was involved with behind the scenes, but somehow most of his ideas seem to have come to pass in certain ways. Now, we haven't been invaded by aliens, but the idea that we might be is certainly being put around. Something else that happened in the 1890s, the mystery airship wave of 1896 and 1897. There were hundreds of sightings of these strange airships all over America and then beyond America in that time period. And it seems quite likely because there are hundreds of newspaper clippings of reports of these things. I don't think it was just some kind of mass hysteria or delusion or panic or something like that. I think there really were craft in the sky, and they were advanced, or further advanced than anything that was publicly known to have been made at that time. They moved quite quickly, they had strong headlights and so forth. And it seems quite likely that somebody was ahead of their time in terms of what they knew about how to make flying machines. So, note what we have there. We have the War of the Worlds. We have the idea being injected into the zeitgeist that we might get invaded by aliens. And we also have probably real craft in the sky that are using technology that is somehow hidden and is also advanced based on what is publicly known. Have a think about that. Now, this is a recent tweet this year from President Donald J. Trump. Based on the tremendous interest shown, I will be directing the Secretary of War and other relevant departments and agencies to begin the process of identifying and releasing government files related to alien and extraterrestrial life, unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, and unidentified flying objects, UFOs, and any and all other information connected to these highly complex but extremely interesting and important matters. God bless America. So, as you'll probably know by now, especially if you watch my channel, but many others, of course, is that the Trump administration and the Pentagon are now releasing files purporting to show strange craft in the sky. So something is being rolled out here. What it is hard to say, but could it be the suggestion that we could be getting invaded by aliens, as H.G. Wells wrote about in the 1890s? I'm coming to suspect that this is more of a narrative than something real. I do think that the UFO phenomenon is real in that people do see lights in the sky that aren't explainable. But whether they're aliens coming to invade us, I am increasingly skeptical. And of course, we have Disclosure Day just released. I believe it was released yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. Spielberg's new film on this topic. Spielberg has played an important role over the years in rolling out, seeding the collective imagination with regards the idea of aliens and UFOs. We have Close Encounters, we have ET, and so on and so forth. And he's just released another UFO film at the same time as the Trump administration are releasing these files. And once again, there's a sort of weird confluence there. What you tend to find is that we're being told things by the government at the same time as popular culture is seeding imagination around the same topics. If you go back through the history of the UFO phenomenon, you see that confluence happening over and over again. So, the reason I'm highlighting this, I think this is relevant. I think this theme is relevant. I think it could come up in July somehow, and I think certainly it will over the next couple of years in more important ways. And somehow this kind of UFO narrative, I think, is being used as some sort of ability, some sort of tool, let's say, to mold our civilization somehow. Perhaps it will influence how money is spent. You know, budgets get funded by these things, but also the threat of something bad happening. In the West, particularly, there's always the idea that we're about, the apocalypse is nigh. Goes back hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. It's I guess back to the Book of Revelation and beyond there into Judaism. This idea that the end is coming, and somehow more than ever we are told that. And I think it's perhaps something that's used um, by the powers that be to essentially manipulate how society is formed and how money is spent and so on and so forth. Anyway, this I think is also relevant to where we find ourselves because this theme goes all the way back to that foundational 1890s period. Now, let's go back to a quote from André Barbault that we already saw, and particularly this part where he says, "The New World civilization, the beginnings of which appeared around the year 2000, is in full flight here." Now, something that I want to highlight here, and I think one of the problems with this quote is he talks about the New World civilization, um, but that doesn't really capture how divided things are right now. And I think the world is divided in quite a number of ways. And I'm not sure it feels like we're all one world. And I think we need to think here about the sign Gemini. The sign of Gemini is expressing itself in very important ways right now and through this basket. Now, one of the reasons for that is that Uranus, the awakener planet, is in Gemini itself. But the other reason is that Pluto and Neptune last conjoined in Gemini in 1891 and 1892. So there is a Gemini-ness about their cycle, and that regardless of which signs they're in, they are going to bring Gemini-ness into the world. Now, Gemini-ness is a bit of a stupid word, but you get what I'm saying. Two-ness. One of the things about Gemini is two-ness, bifurcation, the twins, splits. That theme, I think, runs through the present time, and it's not one maybe that's captured there with Barbault's phrase, the New World civilization. Which civilization? So, of course, we have, in terms of bifurcations, we have what looks like a second Cold War, the split between the US and rising China pictured here. And so, one of the things I think we're probably going to be dealing with over the next few years is this kind of second Cold War, essentially. And that will probably, I would have thought, take us through to early to mid 2030s. We have splits between, well, political splits between the left and the right. You know, those splits aren't healed, they're very real. So it doesn't feel like we're all one thing. We've got Zoran Mamdani here, but we have, you know, who's the socialist mayor of New York now. But then we have Donald J. Trump, the right wing president. So we have these kind of big splits in our societies, which have not been healed at all. And I think we have to factor in the Gemini-ness of the current moment to understand that. And then something else, which I think is very important, which is the split between those who are comfortable with this technocratic, maybe even transhumanist digital civilization that's being rolled out right now, and people aren't comfortable with it. And that, I think, is the really important split right now, or one of them. We've got people logging off right now. We've got people saying, no, I'm not going to live staring at my phone. We've got people that are deliberately leaning into doing things in real life with real people. Here's people making pottery, doing things with your hands, getting out into the nature, touching grass, getting rid of your smartphone and getting a dumb phone. That's something I'm on the cusp of doing myself. And so, you know, a lot of people are saying no to all of this. They're saying no to this totalitarian digital system, which is being constructed right now. And I think a lot more people will continue to say no to it. And that system, the construction of it, they're not going to have everything their own way. You know, we already looked at what's going on with the contradiction between the idea that we need data centers and we supposedly have to conserve energy. You know, those two things don't fit together. So I think there is a split that's emergent at the moment between this kind of civilization that's emerging, this digital totalitarian, to some degree, transhumanist civilization, and those who want the freedom that's basically our birthright and to live more free and to embrace the natural world rather than the limiting structures that are being put up around us. Now, to be clear, I personally, my suspicion is that the impulse on the left is going to be dominant for quite some time, not forever, but probably for the time that a lot of us are around. It's going to be the dominant impulse, and this is going to be the kind of junior partner, the smaller twin. But I think that the impulse on the right is going to grow, and this is going to eventually meet its nemesis and fade away. But I don't think we're there yet, and I don't think we should expect that it's going to go away anytime soon. I very much doubt that. Now, I also want to talk about something specifically related to the basket, a specific aspect of the basket in particular, not just the minor grand trine, but if we add on the opposition between Pluto and Jupiter here, this is an important part of this configuration, right? We have the Pluto-Jupiter opposition also going exact next month in July. Now, oppositions are hard aspects, where those other aspects are flowing. Oppositions are turning points and literal times when an impulse is opposed and has to change form or direction. What does Jupiter-Pluto mean? Jupiter-Pluto, among other things, is great ambition and big money. You think about Pluto, plutocrat, plutocracy, etc. Jupiter is also bigness, and Jupiter also is associated with wealth, the king of the gods, etc. You put Jupiter and Pluto together, and often you get great drive and ambition, and you frequently get great wealth. This is Bill Gates's chart. This is his second house of money. What has he got there? Jupiter, Pluto conjunction, very tight. The second house of money, and we have somebody who used to be the richest man in the world. Very simple astrology. Warren Buffett also has a Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. His is in the 8th house, another money house, house of investment and other people's money. Extremely rich man as well, multi-billionaire, of course. Elon Musk even doesn't have the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, but he does have the Jupiter-Pluto sextile, and it's pretty tight in his chart. Like 27 degrees Jupiter, 27 degrees Pluto there. Richest man in the world, again, has tight aspect between Jupiter and Pluto. So Jupiter and Pluto, big money. What does that mean for July? Well, I've been thinking a bit about this. And one way to have an idea of what it might have to do with, besides maybe the theme of big money, is to look at what happened at the conjunction of this cycle. So in 2020, the pandemic year, Jupiter and Pluto made 3 conjunctions in April, June, and November, launching their current cycle. So what was going on at that time, particularly as it pertains to big money? Well, this was when the COVID pandemic happened, and we had these massive bailouts done all over the world in order to try and keep the economy afloat, but particularly keep banks and corporations afloat. So the Federal Reserve started buying corporate debt. Think about this. Jupiter-Pluto conjunction was in Capricorn, the sign of institutions. We have the Fed buying up corporate debt to basically keep corporations afloat. They didn't do much for the little man. We had the stimulus checks, if I remember rightly, but small business suffered. Big business kept afloat by the system. We have the printing of vast amounts of dollars. This chart here shows the money supply in billions of dollars. And look at that enormous leap in the money supply happening in 2020 at the time of this Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. So perhaps we can think that it could be something like the chickens coming home to roost somehow from this era of massive printing, or something that kind of thematically relates to that, something that maybe changes the direction of the current era and perhaps some kind of problems involving money. I'm not a financial astrologer, as I regularly emphasize, so not financial advice. And this is really kind of speculative. I haven't studied these cycles in great depth. So just keep that in mind. I'm trying to come up with some angles to figure out what might be on the way, but let's see. These are some headlines that I just picked up recently. The stock market is at its frothiest since the global financial crisis, proclaims Citi. Why dip buyers shouldn't bail yet. Yet another way in which 2026 is looking like 1999. Top analyst fears bubble popping with investors and Wall Street out over their skis. Warning signs in markets are emerging that should not be ignored. When bond markets start reminding us of the great financial crisis, investors need to protect themselves. So there's a lot of people warning that we might be about to see the pop of a bubble. The Virgo eclipse of last year, I think, in October, it was October, September, I think that kind of signaled that we're on a countdown now to some kind of serious financial crisis, probably. And those eclipses tend to last 2 or 3 years. So, it could be sometime during that period. But, I'd be looking out for watching the economy, watch what it does in July. Are there serious problems emerging? But then we also have to bear in mind, this is somehow also probably going to be related to this kind of digital society civilization that's being rolled out. So how are those things connected? And here, again, this is very speculative, but might we see something that enables um, the rollout of this plan that the Trump administration has to bring in the use of stable coins as a kind of digital currency. And essentially, I think what they want is they want the whole world to start using dollar-pegged stable coins. The companies that issue these stable coins have to buy dollars to back these stable coins, which potentially could keep the US dollar afloat. And we all know how much national debt the US has these days, vast amount, which is probably unsustainable. So there is this plan to somehow switch to digital currency that can also kind of rescue the current US dominated financial system. So I would say look out for developments along those lines. Are there things that happen here? I'm not saying it all goes pop at this point, but who knows, maybe, but maybe at least look for signs of trouble involving big flows of money. One final point. Fruits. What we're seeing are the fruits of things that were planted a long time ago. I doubt that what we see in July is going to be something completely new and unexpected. I mean, there may be some element of that, but I think that the themes that this stuff is going to concern has already been in play for quite a long time. And again, you can look at those cycles that I was pointing out and what was going on at the times of those conjunctions to have an inkling of what it is that's been planted some time ago and is coming to an important stage of fruition in July. I thought I would make a little prediction just to keep myself right, essentially. There's a part of me that doesn't really want to, because this is also unprecedented. It's very difficult to know what's going to happen. But as argued by Dr. H, who was on my channel quite recently, I think it is a positive thing for astrologers to force themselves to make somewhat specific predictions, if only to just hone our ability to be clear and specific and to go through the process of evaluating, was I right, was I wrong? If I was right, good. If I was wrong, why was I wrong, etc. So a little prediction. Developments in July will reflect moves towards multipolarity and totalitarian digital societies. Opposition to these trends will also be evident. Not a mega specific prediction, I realize, but let's just look out for the major world news and the major events and see if they reflect some of these themes. I suspect that they might. All right. So that is the end of this stream, or part one of this stream. I hope you've found it interesting and somewhat enlightening, or at least it's given you something to think about. I'm going to do a part two for members of the channel at any tier, or for members of my website right now. If you want to join part two and you're not already a member, I'm going to take a 10-minute break before part two starts. And before it starts, I'm going to send out the link to the second part. So I'm going to give you that window. If you want, you can sign up and join the second part. I do need to reserve some of this content just to pay my own bills and so on and so forth. But what we'll be doing in this second part is going deeper into some of these themes and some of the history. I think the essential information, the information that you really need, is in part one. But if you are curious for more, then I would quite happily welcome you as a member, and you can join that. I'll send you the link to join part two shortly. So thank you so much.